Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to 2006 to take a look at the Hugo award-winning novel for that year by Charles Wilson, Spin. So I read this one on Kindle, but the format will not change. What I would like to do, as always, is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked, what I didn't like. I'll put this one to the memory test. I'll make some recommendations, and then we'll rank it on our ever-growing Sci-Fi Shed ladder, where I've been ranking all these novels. So the novel begins with this young boy, Tyler Dupre, playing games on this very large property that is owned by his best friend's parents, Jason and Diane. And they were playing games, intermingling, because Tyler's mother lives in a guest house with her son, taking care of the property, basically. She's a maid. And as they're playing games, they take a look up into the heavens and realize that all the stars have gone blank. So there's no more light coming from the stars. So this is terrifying the children, and they're sort of thinking, what could this mean? What's actually happening here? And they sort of go to bed only to wake up to the world realizing that the stars have been extinguished. And what they soon learn is that there seems to be some kind of membrane that's enveloping the planet, stopping all light from coming into the planet, right? So all the stars and the sun, for that matter, are sort of blocked from view. Now, there's talk of these hypotheticals because something must have created this effect, and for what purpose is not quite known. So there's always this talk of hypotheticals, and as the children grow up, we find that Jason, Tyler's best friend, he's working for his father's company, this large, very wealthy aerospace company that sort of took advantage of that period when the stars were extinguished with some clever technology to basically make a market for themselves. So they're now a very wealthy organization, and for a very long time, Edie Lawton, who happens to be Jason's father, was sort of pruning him for that job. Now Jason is sort of obsessed with this spin membrane, like what's caused it, what's behind it, and he's using all sorts of technology to try to figure out exactly what this is. On the other hand, we have Tyler, who's grown up to be a doctor, and he's working away as an MD, and he sort of really, gets employed by Jason because Jason has got a rather interesting illness that he's needing to cope with. So he sort of employs Tyler to come on board and help him with his sickness. So this gives Tyler a rather interesting opportunity to really understand what's happening with this spin, what's behind it, and what can be done to avoid disaster. Because it doesn't take long for the scientists to discover that this spin is basically propelling the Earth forward. For every second that passes on Earth, 3.7 years pass in real time. Basically, every year, 100 million years actually goes forward in time, right? So that obviously has a apocalyptic meaning to the planet because they're going full force into what will be the end of the sun. So they're all sort of, Earth is sort of gone nuts, right? They're just living under this constant fear of what will happen when we reach the end of days and our sun finally expires. But this also provides some opportunities because Jason and his group in this aerospace company take on plans to terraform Mars. So that Mars, what we learn is that Mars hasn't actually been encompassed by this membrane that's covering the Earth. So time on Mars is a lot slower than what's happening on Earth. And they use this rather novel approach to terraform Mars, which I thought was brilliant. So, on the other hand, we have Diane, Jason's sister and Tyler's love interest, who has been for many years, sort of dealing with what this apocalyptic event means. She sort of joins this new age semi-religious movement, gets married to this guy who sort of has all sorts of interesting things, which brings into the story a whole lot of really interesting biblical prophecies around the red heifer and the coming of the second temple, reigning in the coming of the second Messiah. So rather interesting blend of science fiction in this one with some religious overtones that I found was thoroughly enjoying. So the question really is, what will happen with the efforts of terraforming Mars? Will something happen there that will enable, with the hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that that planet will have, to bring some kind of hope back to humanity? What are these hypotheticals? What's behind them? And what would be the ultimate fate of the planet Earth? All is to be revealed in a pretty old chunky novel. I think it's 500-600 pages. I'll put it down in the description. But it's a rather lengthy novel, but one that I found thoroughly enjoyable. So what is there to like in particular about spin? For me, it was that concept, right? I've often thought, we take for granted that the sun will rise every morning and the moon and stars will come out at night. But what if some external entity was to change all of that? What would be the impact on the population? Like, what kind of effect will it have on us, on our technologies, on our spiritual and religious beliefs, right? So I thought that concept was just brilliant, and one that I think that Robert Charles Wilson really put together well, because he's looked at what the scientific repercussions of this would be, as well as what would the religious repercussions would be, which I thought was very well done and very well put together. The other thing I really enjoyed was the unique look at terraforming Mars in this particular novel. Now, I like terraforming novels. I mentioned them in the past. I'm a big fan of Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, but I did make a critique when I reviewed that book for our shed letter that, sometimes I thought that what happened in that span of time from when the novel began to the end of the novel had those terraforming efforts, I just thought were just too accelerated. Was a bit of a stumbling block for me. I thought, how could all this happen in such a small period of time? And what I really liked in this novel, in Spin by Robert Charles Wilson, is that he had time on his side, right? So for every year that passed on Earth, 100 million years would pass on this planet Mars, right? So it really gave an interesting idea of how terraforming could happen on a planet like Mars that I found was really exciting. The other thing I really enjoyed was the view that Robert Charles Wilson had on the human condition. So what would happen to us as humans on this planet facing this apocalyptic event? So I really enjoyed the way he's taken both the scientific point of view, the very analytical scientific point of view, what is this, what's behind it, how do we go about resolving this? And on the other hand, he's looked at the religious impact it would have as well on different communities on the planet, and what new religions may rise from this. And the thing that I really enjoyed as well, that stood out from memory, was the concept of the red heifer that would be required to start the sacrificial system again. I really found that part of the story very interesting, and it was really interesting the way Robert Charles Wilson spun that into the narrative. The other thing I enjoyed as well was the use of these von Neumann machines, and I'll leave it at that to avoid spoilers. So that seems to be a whole lot of great accolades for what I feel is an A-grade novel, right? Which will sort of hint at where this one may land on the ladder. But I'd have to say that you've got to manage your expectations coming into this. I think this is one that either hits, and it hits hard, or it completely misses for some people. For me, I'm one of those, it hits hard. Like, I really enjoyed the concept. I thought the novel was well written. I thought the pacing was great. I enjoyed the characters overall, so I really couldn't pick too many faults with it. But I know that some people have a different opinion of that. So I'd have to say, when you're coming into this novel, don't set your expectations too highly. I think just come in expecting a decent novel and see where it takes you by the end of the read. I think from what I've read online of some of the comments over the years, having read this book, almost 20 years ago now, is that some people come in with very high expectations and are sometimes disappointed. Look, I highly recommend this one. I don't think you will be disappointed, but I guess that's my main warning here. Just manage your expectations, because some people, I think, might find this one just a little bit bloated and a little bit padded out. It wasn't my experience, but I suspect that there will be some people that if this one doesn't quite hit the mark, will feel that way about the novel. So when it comes to the memory test, look, this one stood like a bright shining beacon. From the very first page, I remembered exactly what this novel was about. I remember the concept very clearly. I remember the religious themes blended into this novel quite clearly as well. But I would have to say I couldn't quite recall the ending. And another thing I should say, that this was one of the very few novels that gives you that jaw-dropping moment. I literally was through a part of the novel where my jaw dropped. I just went, what? Right? It has got those moments in the novel which I thoroughly enjoyed. But yeah, when it comes to the memory test, highly memorable novel. The concept was really strong. The characters, honestly, I couldn't remember much about the characters, but those religious themes and the concept definitely stood the test of time. So when it comes to recommendations, I sort of keep a mental note as I'm reading the novel. What novels could I talk to? What does this remind me of? And what's rather interesting is that there's a section in the novel where Tyler Dupre is actually a pretty keen science fiction reader, and the next two novels he actually recommends to somebody in a novel to have a read through. And the first one was Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. So if you've enjoyed this, you find there's a pretty big chunk of the novel that sort of resonates with this, and I think you'll rather enjoy. So if you've enjoyed this one, I'd say have a go at Robert Charles Wilson's Spin. I think you'll see similarities. The other obvious one is Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. Like, I really like the spin that we have in Spin when it comes to terraforming. What a terrible pun that was. But I really like the spin that Robert Charles Wilson had on terraforming Mars, and it sort of addresses some of the criticisms that I had when it comes to Red Mars. So if you've enjoyed this, which is an absolute classic novel, there's definitely a big section in this novel that talks to terraforming that I think you'll find rather appealing. The other one that will be coming up in the next couple of weeks is Xinjian Lu's The Free Body Problem. Because this is a rather interesting story as well, right? Because there's some kind of alien threat and we're not quite sure what it is, why is it there, what's it really want. And you'll see similarities in what is in this great novel, The Free Body Problem, in what we saw in Robert Charles Wilson's Spin. We've got to rank it on our evergreen sci-fi shed ladder. Let me flip the cameras around and we'll see where this one lands. So back to the shed ladder and ranking today's 2006 Hugo award-winning novel by Robert Charles Wilson, Spin. So when I apply my full criteria, which I've documented down below, it's going to be rather interesting to see exactly where this one lands. Because when it comes to the concept and execution, this one got full marks, which sort of takes it automatically around the A side or top of the B side. But the other thing that it really had in its favor was the memory test. Now, I was surprised that I read this book in 2006 and we're in 2025 now, so 19 years. And honestly, it feels like it was not that long ago that I read this novel. So it did really well in the memory test as well, which sort of puts it definitely in the A side. So when we look at the A side, you know, books like Hyperion, one of the reasons that's ranking so highly, because I love the way that it takes all these science fiction themes into this, you know, multiple short story format that just gives you the whole gamut of science fiction. And in some ways, Spin is somewhat similar because it takes, you know, the use of von Neumann machines, terraforming, alien threats, technology solutions, religion-based science fiction themes. So it blends all these concepts together into what I thought was a really wonderful novel, which is sort of reminiscent of what Hyperion was for me as well. But where Hyperion, you know, gets the advantage is around the characters, the plot, and the ending, and the writing itself, right? So when we look at that, it's going to be somewhere towards the middle of the bunch. I don't think it's going to be quite at the level that Hyperion, Dune, or Gateway was for me. So maybe it's worthwhile taking a look at books like Doomsday Book. Because what was really interesting about Doomsday Book was it wasn't so much the concept or the execution or the memory test. Where this one really shone was around the writing, around the plot, and around the characters. So where this one, you know, didn't score highly in the concept and execution, it did really well when it comes to the characters and the plot and the ending. So different kind of novel, but one that is sort of similar when I crunch my numbers. So the question really remains, we're looking at Rendezvous with Rama. It is such an absolute giant of the genre. And I've got a gap between Rendezvous with Rama and Doomsday Book because I'm still not quite convinced. Because part of me thinks that Rendezvous with Rama, you know, the characters weren't as good, I don't think. And the plot and the ending had some issues as well. But it's such an iconic novel, such a wonderful concept, that I'm finding really hard to rank Spin over. But on the other hand, this concept in Spin is also a wonderful concept. And I think altogether the story reads better, the plot is a little bit more enjoyable, and I'm a bit of a crossroads. But as I was talking through my logic just now in front of you on the camera, I've just made up my mind. Spin by Robert Charles Wilson is going to sit just below Rendezvous with Rama. And that's because Rendezvous with Rama is just an iconic classic of the genre. And I couldn't bring myself to rate Spin above it. So look, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Top 10 novel. Would you agree that this is a top 10 novel when it comes to all these wonderful novels that we've ranked on the board? Honestly, really enjoyed this one, you know, and as I was reading it, and I do remember it clearly, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, you know, where's this going to sit on the board, right? And in my initial reading, I started reading and I thought, yeah, this is probably definitely a B grade novel somewhere, as in a B column novel somewhere. It's going to be somewhere towards the B side. But as I continued reading, it all came back to me, and as the concept really embedded itself again into my mind, I soon realized that for me, this is definitely a top 10 novel as the board stands to date. I would love to hear your opinions. Have you read Spin? Did you enjoy it? I have not read the sequels, and from what I've read online, I'm not in a huge hurry to read them either, because I really liked the way the Spin ended, and I think it was fine as a standalone novel. And I've read enough of some of the comments online when it comes to the sequels that it's definitely not in my immediate TBR. But I'd love to hear your comments. Have you read it? Would you rate it as highly? Do you think this even deserves a Hugo Award? Have you read the sequels? Should I have a go at the sequels? All these questions are posed to you, my friends, and I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time in the shed.